when I'm getting to the bag, ayy. Got the foot on the gas, pedal to the metal when the lane moving fast, ayy. Ayy, let them all cross. If they hate, then let them hate and make a bigger boss, ayy.
This episode is brought to you by SPI Logistics, the premier freight agent logistics firm in North America. For over 40 years, SPI has been diligently building the most successful freight agent network to provide first-class relationships for our shippers, receivers, and carrier partners. We are more than another transportation network. We are a dedicated team of professionals united by one singular purpose, and that is to expedite our agents' success. All of our agents are set up for success on day one, as they are provided with a full suite of support staff that is ready to assist them with everything from after-hours emergencies to financial and administrative needs on a no-fee basis. This way, you can focus on continuing to grow your business. There is no financial risk to start, and you have the ability to earn up to 75% in commissions. If you are looking to take control of your financial future and build your business with the backing of one of the most successful logistics firms in North America, visit www.spi3pl.com to learn more. Do me a favor and let them know that the Freight Coach sent you.
What is up, ladies and gentlemen? We are back. We are live. It is the Freight Coach Podcast, the top podcast in transportation, coming to you guys every single weekday, 8:30 a.m. Pacific, 10:30 Central, to break down some industry headlines. But most importantly, you guys provide some actual insight into what you can do with all of this information. This is your first time tuning in. Welcome. This is the real side of freight, ladies and gentlemen. And I do say that before every single show. And what I mean by that is I only speak with transportation professionals, because at the end of the day, you guys want to talk to the right individuals who have done what you're looking to do or who are currently doing what you're trying to achieve. So you can take that information, apply it, utilize it, and see a meaningful difference in their business and your life. Happy Thursday, everybody. I got a very special guest for you guys here today. We're going to be talking about HazMat freight. And what is HazMat freight? What's not? What might surprise you out there? And really, I think it's one of those classifications that I don't have a ton of experience in. I've moved a couple of HazMat shipments here and there out there, but it's a question that I see probably popping up more often than not is this load actually HazMat? And I think it's one of those topics that we can take a deep dive in on. And today's guest is going to deliver that. So I have Wendy Buckley on the show today with Stars HazMat Consulting. So Wendy, thank you so much for taking the time to join me today.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it. Looking forward to talking.
I'm looking forward to this. Like, you know, I think this is one of those topics that you can't just move HazMat freight, right? Like, I think and that's one of the things that gets a lot of service providers in trouble is they're like, oh, we'll do anything, we'll do everything. It's like, yeah, but are you doing it right? And before we get into any of that though, Wendy, like, how'd you get your start in freight? What brought you into transportation?
So I was actually a firefighter doing HazMat response at the time. And nice. The DOT asked me to come be a HazMat inspector for FRA, which is the Federal Road Administration. So I went from being an emergency responder to being a regulator. So I didn't know a whole lot about rail at the time. So I got to train in all the disciplines, learned all about everything from track to bridge, signals, and of course, HazMat tank cars, in particular, hopper cars. It was the best job. I loved it. Absolutely loved it.
And then how did we get to starting Stars HazMat Consulting? What was it? Where you were like, I always love asking founders this question. Like, what was that thing that you were like, you know what, I'm done. I'm going to go do it for myself.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I never intended to be an entrepreneur. I never intended to start my own company. After my FRA, I also worked for the state of New Jersey as regulatory compliance for them. I was an investigator for Amtrak, so I really honed my investigation skills. And then I became a trainer. So I was training in all sorts of HazMat regulations. And then I went to work for a global laboratory supply company running their regulatory affairs department. And that was really the tipping point, because while I loved the job, I really thoroughly enjoyed working for a shipper. The lady that I worked for was absolutely insane and started throwing things at us like paperweights. And so I just, after a couple complaints to HR that nothing got done, I decided that this was not for me. And so I opened up my own shop and got my first client. And as a matter of fact, I'm going to see that very first client again next week. And it's been 14 years since I started the company, and they're still my clients. So that's pretty exciting for me.
I love that. I have so many questions about this, Wendy. And this is, again, like my inner freight junkie is really going to come out when it comes to this. And especially when it's stuff that like I don't have a ton of experience with. And I've moved HazMat freight very occasionally, right? Like a couple of times here and there, but it's nothing that I can sit here and say I am an absolute subject matter expert in. And this is why I love having individuals like yourself on who have done it for literally their entire career. And then, let's start with your firefighter background out there. How did that experience play into working with some of your clients? And it's some of those things that I think a lot of us, when we do a job for so long, I don't want to say we take it for granted, but it's so ingrained in how we operate. And then when you talk about it to others, they're like, wait, what? How have we been doing this wrong for so long?
Yeah. And you actually do see that a lot, that even the big companies that have been doing it for, 100 years still make mistakes, and they don't even know because they were trained that way and they've always done it that way. And so I would say that every step along my career, I had some pretty amazing opportunities. I have a much more diverse career in HazMat than many people get to have. Impressively, there's a lot of people that are like, oh, I'm retiring after 40 years. And that's amazing. They know that company inside and out. They know their job inside and out. But one of the great things about what I've had to do, or I've gotten the chance to do, is to do so many different aspects of this. So the emergency response side, I saw the results of what happens when things really go wrong. Mm-hmm. I worked as a regulator. I got to see why those things go wrong. Well, I won't say nobody, but let's say the vast majority of people do not set out to do the wrong thing. They're not trying to get away with something. They're not doing it because they don't care. They honestly don't know. It's definitely ignorance rather than an attitude of it just doesn't matter. So I got to see that, the emergency response side. I got to see the regulatory side. And then when I was doing training, I discovered that most of the training companies that are out there provide a very generic training, not specific to what the customer is doing, not specific to their operations. So they really were lacking that function-specific piece that's so, so critical. And for me, that's where I spend most of my time when I do training now. So I would say that every step along the way has informed what I do. And even the investigation side was able to help me understand root cause analysis really, really well. And then working for the global supply company, I worked for a shipper and I interacted with carriers and I understood frustrated packages and why things don't get to where they're going, and how, and how, especially with air, how that works quite a bit. So I've been pretty lucky and pretty blessed on that way.
Let's start with what commodities are hazardous that people don't think are hazardous.
So one of the big ones I want to stress is anything that's a limited quantity is actually still hazardous. So if you see that black and white symbol, everyone's like, oh, that's not regulated. Yeah, yes, it is. It's still a HazMat. It just gets out of a lot of the rules. But specific products, vanilla extract. I've had 3 food companies get in trouble with food products they didn't know were HazMat, and vanilla extract or flavoring extracts of any kind are definitely HazMat, and they don't realize that. The other one is aerosols. Man, people get caught all the time with aerosols. So something that is a cooking spray or a hairspray or air freshener, believe it or not, those things are all hazardous materials. Of course, lithium batteries, that's a major HazMat that people may or may not be familiar with. The beer that you have in your fridge at night, the wine, the liquor, those are all hazardous materials. There's so many things that we come into contact with, and everything in our current society is either made from HazMat or is HazMat itself. So like even silverware, that chroming process, the plating process, HazMat is involved in that. HazMat.
No, for sure. And I think that's so in my brief experience with HazMat freight is one of my old customers back in the day was a sparkling water company. And we were moving ingredients for them. And there was a couple of shipments that were like, hey, this is HazMat. And I'm like, wait, what? Why? And they're like, it's HazMat before it's mixed with the beverage. So it's the ingredient itself is in fact HazMat. After it's been processed and manufactured, then it is considered not HazMat, because I'm assuming, again, I'm not a science guy at all, but I'm assuming the dilution happens when water's mixed in, and that's what makes it that way. But I think that those are some of those things that you don't think about. And I think in the freight world, this is where you can get in trouble, right? It's because you might be moving finished product for your customer, 10,000 shipments, and then they come to you with a load of ingredients. They assume it's HazMat, but you don't. And then you go in and you pick it up and, hopefully nothing happens. But that's when you're going to find yourself in trouble. Is that some of those situations, Wendy, when you're working with your clients where you're sitting down, you're like, hey, why are you guys moving HazMat? Are you even aware of that? Have there been some of those situations that have arose?
Oh yeah, I mean, absolutely. In warehouses too, particularly get flat-footed. So things like fruit concentrates to make juices. I think peach extract was explosive. Orange extract is corrosive. I mean, these things, like, who would think about that? I mean, you have your orange juice every day, but you're right. The dose makes the poison. And so, I actually have one client who they told me they didn't handle hazardous materials, but they wanted to start doing it. And so they gave me a tour of their warehouse. It was a 3PL. And they gave me a tour of the warehouse, and they had 28,000 e-bikes, which they did not realize contained a lithium battery, which is incredibly dangerous. And their main product that they held was giant rolls of paper. So a nice heavy fire load with 28,000 lithium batteries. They've had a heart attack when I explained all that to them. So there's definitely, I mean, you're absolutely right. That happens all the time. Absolutely.
So let's start with like the first step here, because, I think that, contrary to what you see on the internet, you don't just have it all figured out when you start a business, when you're in business, and a lot of it is figuring it out as you go. So what are some of those things where it's like, we're looking at step one, like my company hires you, Wendy, to come in, like we want to start offering HazMat transportation out there. What is step one on like, is it a process? Is it getting the right insurance? What does that look like?
Well, certainly getting the right insurance. And one of the things I've been doing for my clients recently is reviewing their insurance policies, because I have found that a few of them, their policy explicitly excludes operations that they're doing, and they don't even know it. So the insurance policy may have been written a few years ago and just been renewed without looking at it, and they're doing some storage or transportation or whatever blending, and their insurance policy says that particular operation is not covered, and they don't even know. So that is definitely something that we do look at. But I think the most important thing is getting the training and setting up the procedures right from the get-go. So I help my clients to write standard operating procedures. But listen, SOPs are no good if they're either one paragraph and not helpful at all, or if they're 54 pages and no one's going to read it, right? It has to be concise. It has to be direct, without any unnecessary information, but with all the appropriate information. And it's a delicate balance to get people to actually read it. And then you've got to train people to those procedures, setting up things, making sure you have the supplies that you need, making sure that you have emergency response training and that you have the supplies for that you need. There's just so much that goes into it. But step one is identifying that you don't have what you need and figuring out what those things are.
Yeah, I think the insurance thing, I know a lot of people are talking about fraud and double brokering and all of that's going on. I think, yes, that is a major issue, and I'm not trying to downplay it. I think what you're describing there, and then especially with all the insurance folks I've had on my show over the years, commodities that are being hauled that are on their a carrier's exclusion list, I think is way more common than people think. And I think that is probably a larger issue than is ever going to get any headlines for, because again, people look at it like this: hey, you have active insurance, boom, book them on the load, they're good to go. Or hey, you have HazMat coverage, boom, book them on the load. But did you take a couple of layers back? Did you see, is this specific commodity covered underneath there? And then, again, I don't like to think in a negative tone, but again, like if they don't even know, the trucking company or the broker, if they don't even know that the insurance is valid for this, I would assume they don't have an accident response plan. They have nothing behind the scenes in the event something happens, right? And I think like that is where the issues are going to start to compound. And, and it sounds like that's one of those things, like when you're working with your clients, Wendy, is yeah, you can have an SOP, but if you're not training your people on it, or if it's too wordy, what do you do in that situation? So it's like, what are one of those things though from like a training, like we're talking about that, what are some of those effective training tactics that you have seen over the years to get people to buy into this?
Well, I'll tell you, the vast majority of the adult population cannot sit in a classroom, take those skills that they learn, and then apply them in the real world. It seems very straightforward. You sit in a class, you learn how to do it, but it doesn't work like that in the real world. The vast majority of the adult population has a difficult time with reading or listening to something and then applying it. So hands-on training, there is nothing better. most people will admit to you that they learn best by doing. But when you don't sit there and you think about the consequences of that and how that affects what you're doing and the training that you're providing, I mean, you can sit them down in front of a computer all day and CBT, and who's going to be saying, yeah, I absorbed everything I learned in a CBT, computer-based module? No one. Most of them tune them out. They're doing something else while they're listening to it. I've done it myself. So you've got to make sure that it's interactive so that they will actually absorb it, hear it, and understand it, and then more importantly, that they can apply it. And once you have the operation running, you need to audit that operation. If you don't have the skill set to do it, bring in a third party, but it can be done internally if you have the skill set, if you know what is required. One benefit of a third party is that they can bring in things that you might not know. Like, a consulting firm will see hundreds of different companies, and they'll be able to take the best things that happen from all of those and apply those to your operation. But internally, you're going to know that operation better than anybody. So there's benefits and drawbacks to each. But making sure that you're starting off on the right foot. That insurance piece is really important. One of my clients, a 3PL, recently had insurance that allowed for them to transport certain hazardous materials, but they weren't allowed to store them. So they can't cross-dock, they can't bring them in their facility for a few days while they wait for something else. So they could move them on their trucks, but they weren't allowed to bring them into the building.
Now that's another one of those things that I think is way more frequent than people think. Robert Cowton has a question. He says the biggest issue he's experienced is the staff that takes a CFR 49 course but doesn't know how to fill out the forms. Fix the last chapter of the CFR course, customized to each company process. This could close the gap. What are your thoughts on that? And I guess, so I'm going to be the dumb guy in the room. What's a CFR 49 course? Let's start there, and we'll answer that.
So 49 CFR refers to a DOT HazMat training course. In other words, a transportation course. So there's a lot of different types of HazMat out there. There's HazWalker, which is an OSHA class. There's hazardous waste, which is an EPA class. But 49 CFR refers to the transportation class. And that could be not only for drivers, but also for shippers, for 3PLs, for anyone who's affecting the transportation chain. Mm-hmm. And so my thoughts on his comment about just changing one chapter or one module of a class is that's not enough. When I was teaching the public workshops with one of the training providers in the country, there's two really big ones, right? And that everybody kind of knows, and they're both pretty generic. And what I mean by that is anybody can take them, whether you're an oil and gas company, or whether you're a laboratory just doing some limited quantity stuff. I mean, those two things have very different needs. And if I am teaching a class for everybody, I've got to cover everything. So I've got to talk about bulk and non-bulk and limited quantity, and I've got to talk about radioactives and explosives and flammables and corrosives. But if all you need is one little piece of that, you're not going to be listening to the other stuff. And then you've got to try to sort through, okay, this is important, that's important, that's important. And people are not real good at doing that. So my finding is that if the class is not customized for the audience, that the absorption rate and the retention rate is very low. And so simply just taking, a class and checking the box, yeah, sure, that'll get you out of a fine with the DOT, but does it really get you what you need to be safe, to be effective, to be efficient, and to be compliant? And the answer is usually no.
So how often does this stuff change though, Wendy, where it's like you would need to recertify or make sure that you are compliant? Or is this why, again, you need somebody like yourself to come in and ensure that you're on top of this? Because again, I think that, some people would be shocked to know when they're out there and they're self-employed and they're starting a business, how many rules and regulations you actually have to follow out there. And this is where it's like those things fall between the cracks out there. So are changes to the 49 CFR course, stuff like that, does that change often? You have to be recertified often on that? What does that look like?
So the regulations require that you be recertified at a minimum of every 3 years, and then also anytime a regulation changes. Now, the regulations have the ability to change every day. That doesn't happen, though. They certainly don't change every day, but they do change multiple times a year, typically. This has been a little bit of a weird year, but most of the time when the government is acting the way it normally does, there will be several regulatory changes in different areas throughout the year. Now, not all of those are going to apply to what you're doing. Mm-hmm. And that's the other key, is knowing what's changed, when it's effective, and whether or not it affects anything that you're doing. Because the change might only be regarding, the manufacture of cylinders. great. It's a HazMat regulatory change, but it doesn't affect you because you're a driver.
Yeah.
So those types of things, that's the other part, is keep it on top of it.
Is there any commodity? So I think a common misconception, and I actually literally just saw a post about this week where somebody was asking, they're like, hey, I have one piece to move. It's only like 250 pounds. It's HazMat. And then somebody commented, oh, if it's below 1,000 pounds, it can't be, it's not considered hazardous. Is there any truth to that, or can you explain that?
Yeah, first of all, it is hazardous. Let's be absolutely clear about that. Whether or not something is hazardous has everything to do with the characteristics of the material. Now,
It has nothing to do with the weight of the move.
The fact of it being hazardous, and let's define hazardous for a second.
Yeah.
A hazardous material is something that poses, literally, this is the definition, it poses an unreasonable risk to health, safety, and property. And there is no, if that material doesn't change its properties, then that is not going to change, no matter what quantity it's in, no matter what package it's in. But what does change is the regulatory burden that you're subject to. Mm-hmm. So when you have smaller packages, you can get out of some of the rules because it poses less of a risk in transportation. So if the material has been properly packaged and secured in the truck, then it should pose very little hazard to the driver in most cases. Now, if the package was not closed properly by the shipper, or if the driver has an accident, then things can change very quickly. But assuming the package has been closed properly and it's secured in the truck, the risk is very low. But if you do wreck a truck of all HazMat packages, the chances of all of them breaking open is pretty low. Yes, you may break open a few, but your exposure is not going to be the entire truckload for the most part. But if you take a tank truck full of material and now you have a small breach in that truck, an accident or whatever, you could potentially lose the entire load, which is 6,000 to 10,000 gallons typically. Mm-hmm. So the risk is much higher. So bulk packages do have more regulation. Now, what that man actually should have said was, you're not required to have a HazMat endorsement if the load is below 1,000 pounds, depending on the hazard class. If it's a flammable liquid or corrosive, then that is true. If it's something like a dangerous when wet or poison inhalation hazard, that rule is not true.
Okay. So is this another one of those things, though, that, again, there's a lot of misinformation out there in regards to hazardous materials, right? Because I think this is why you need to go below surface level in headline reading on a lot of this stuff, because I will openly admit this. I was always under the impression that if it was below 1,000 pounds, you did not need a HazMat endorsement for CDL driver to pick it up, right? But it sounds like you do, depending on the actual commodity that's being shipped. It's not a blanket rule that if it's below 1,000 pounds, there are actual commodities that are excluded from that.
Yes. We refer to those as Table 1 and Table 2 materials. The Table 2 materials are going to be the less dangerous stuff like flammables and corrosives. The more dangerous stuff like poison inhalation hazards and dangerous when wet materials are Table 1, and they require placarding in any quantity. It doesn't matter. And so they do not require a HazMat. I'm sorry. When anything requires a placard, it requires a HazMat endorsement. Now, there's one additional rule that if the material is a Class 9 material, it does not, in the U.S. anyway, it does not require a placard at all, and therefore does not require a HazMat endorsement. Now, if it's a liquid in a tank truck, it may still require a tank endorsement. Mm-hmm. But that does not apply in Canada. If you cross the Canadian border for even a moment, you now require a HazMat endorsement and a placard.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. So again, you learn something new every day, ladies and gentlemen. And again, it's like I see a lot of this stuff, right? Like I see a lot of generic information that's being shared across social media. And my fear is people take a lot of what they read online to heart, and then they start applying it in their business. And then the fines come in, and then the government's like, oh, you didn't know? Yeah, we don't care. Here's a $10,000 fine. Pay it. Or, oh, you don't have the money to pay it? Cool. We'll just shut your business down. Right? Like these are the real world ramifications of not knowing, right? And again, like I want to sit here and say that you're going to figure this out along the way, but like this is why it's like once you get below, this is why I preach the niche so much inside of transportation, because there are things like this that Wendy is describing right now that people will, oh, what's going on?
Sorry, that's my son. He's not supposed to be in here right now. Sorry.
That's funny. That is funny. Oh. We keep it, Wendy, We keep it
My
real.
son
I have kids too. I keep it real on the show. That's awesome.
Yeah, my son's autistic, so he doesn't always quite follow the rules. I apologize.
I don't follow the rules either, Wendy. That's why I am self-employed. But anyway, but you know, like I think like this is the like the importance of like if you're gonna operate inside of transportation where there is a lot of opportunities that are out there and you become a niche-based provider, like these are the real separators that when it boils down to it. And I think like this is why it's like you need to work with individuals like yourself if you're going to go down this, because again, like the government doesn't care, OSHA doesn't care. Like if you have this stuff inside of your warehouse, like you're guilty, right? Especially if you do not have the proper documentation and certifications to hold this product inside of your possession.
Yeah, the regulatory enforcement is based on the phrase in the regulations that's knew or should have known. And in other words, you either knew the regulation and did it anyway, or you should have known because you have a responsibility to know since you're handling this stuff. So there is no excuse that they'll accept that has, I don't know. They just don't care. That's irrelevant because you should have known if you're going to deal with this stuff.
So what's some advice, if you could give one piece of advice to a company out there who maybe they are hauling HazMat right now, they're considering it. What is something that, you know, like, how do we start to ensure, like, what is something that they could do today to look at their organization to be like, hey, we're good? Or if this isn't there, we need to get a hold of somebody like Wendy.
So the thing is, you know, this can be a very, very lucrative business if you do it right, if you manage the risk properly. But if you don't, it can destroy your company. It can destroy people's lives. It can kill people. It can hurt people. So the first thing is you need to look at the operation and see if what's the quality of the training that you're providing? What's the documentation that you're keeping, that you're putting out to the public? The documentation is not the most important thing by any means. The operation is the most important thing. But what I will say is that is an indicator that things are not right. So if your shipping papers don't meet the regulations, if your drivers, you know, quiz them, right? You know, if you're the boss and you know the rules and you know what's supposed to be going on, that's fabulous. But what do your employees know? And this is what I always tell people when I do an audit. I'll have a conversation with the contact person before I do an audit. I'm like, okay, you know, discuss things with them. I'm like, all right, so I know what you know now. When we go out and we talk to the employees, don't say anything because I don't want to hear your answer. I want to hear what they have to say. What information is getting to them since they're the ones doing the job every day? Is the training effective? We can know that by just having a conversation with our people. Do they understand what is necessary and do they understand the risks of the materials that they're dealing with? Ask them. Ask them if they have suggestions on how to make the operation better because, again, they're the ones doing it every day. If anybody's going to have an indication that something isn't right, it's going to be them. We keep having this problem, but we see this and no one does anything about it. You would be surprised at how often I hear that. Talk to your people.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I'm not surprised by that at all at this point. I think that we're at a point, and I see this where it's like they'll always blame ignorance, like, oh, I didn't know, or they're like, it's somebody else's fault. You never told me this. But like, I think like that absolute responsibility is like you're in possession of this stuff. Like you better know, right? Like it's just not a risk I'm willing to take. Like as like big of a risk taker as I am in life, Wendy, there are certain things where I am the least amount of a risk taker out there. And especially when it comes down to our friends in DC and everything else, like I got to make sure all of that stuff is in line because I don't want to make a fatal mistake inside of my business that cost me my business. And it's just like, I tie it back to an ignorant move on my part out there. And I think HazMat, you know, again, it's one of those things like this is literal life and death that we're talking about out there. And, you know, it's one of those things that you just don't want to roll the dice. But Wendy, I'm going to have you back on in the future. I feel like when it comes down to hazardous materials and transportation and stuff like this, like we could really build off of this episode. I appreciate your time today, though. How does anybody reach out to you, though, Wendy, if they want to find out more about what you got going on?
I'd be happy to give you that. One thing I do want to add before we end is brokers, please get yourself some training. There is an argument to be made that you're not necessarily required by regulation to get training, but if you don't know to ask the question, you could get yourself in a lot of trouble and really hurt your business. And we do offer a class for brokers that'll be launching any day now. And so way you can get a hold of us, please check out our website, starshazmat.com. That's STARS. You can also please hit me up on LinkedIn. I'll be happy to accept your connection. Myself and my company both have a page. Email is info@starshazmat.com. So please feel free to reach out if we can help in any way. We do have some online training that the brokers would really benefit from. So I highly recommend it. And we also have a class specific for drivers as well.
Perfect. Wendy, thank you so much for your time. If you guys cannot find Wendy out there, hit me up. I will gladly put you guys in contact with her and her company. But that's going to be it for today, ladies and gentlemen. As always, if you got value in what you heard, subscribe to the show, you guys. And if you're feeling ambitious, rank it on iTunes and Spotify, because if you see value, your network's going to see it as well. I appreciate you guys. I love you guys. And we'll be talking to you soon.
Came back with a bang. Window down, yelling out money, anything. Hey, ooh, got the foot on the gas. Pedal to the metal when I'm getting to the bag. Hey, got the foot on the gas. Pedal to the metal when the lane moving fast.